Hey, what's up? Gary here. New to the Quad Cortex and looking for some tips and tricks on how to get started? You've come to the right place. Let's go check it out. Hello, and welcome to the new series on the Quad Cortex for new users and tips and tricks for existing users. So in this video series, I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're a new owner of a Quad Cortex. Congratulations, it's an awesome unit. I really do like it. I've had it for about 1.5 years. I think it's been out for about 3.5 years, maybe even 4 now. There was a mixed review when it first came out, but I think they've really turned things around when it comes to software updates and just general quality of life changes and such, and a lot of the engineering challenges that they originally faced at launch. I think they're coming around and making a good run at making good on the promises that they initially did when they sold the unit, which is awesome. It is April 4th, 2024 as of today's date. Right around the corner, the next major software release is 3.0.0 from Neural DSP, and that is a very, very, very big update. It's finally going to bring the Neural DSP archetype plugins to be supported on the Quad Cortex. Now, there is only a few of those that are on the X series, as they call it, which is a slightly different framework if you're kind of technical and nerdy on the VST side. Some of them are going to be supported, some of them are not until they update the plugins as well to be supportable. But that's going to be huge. There's going to be so much that's happening on the horizon. I definitely think that that's breathing a lot of new life into the Quad Cortex. So super exciting time to get started. I think this is going to be a wonderful time for you to be able to pick up a unit and have a good time with it. So without further ado, I am going to go through this initial video, give you a number of just tips and tricks on basically getting started and getting you to the point where you can start to interface with the presets that are here in a way that you start to get comfortable with the unit. And then I'm going to release a lot of little snippets of videos for tips and tricks that'll walk you through a little bit more complex and challenging things as well as just cool things that I find that are just, again, good for quality of life and being able to play with the unit. So without further ado, the first major thing you have to do, and this should be probably pretty obvious, is powering up the unit. We need to get it powered and get it started, okay? So definitely if you've purchased the unit pre-hand, right? So if someone else has owned it before you, I want to give you a little word of caution, okay? According to what Neural DSP says throughout their manuals, you need a 12 volt, 3 amp, which is the equivalent of 36 watt power supply to power this unit. They're not kidding. Now, it might turn on with less power, right? But when you start really pushing the limits of this system, it has multiple processors in it. And the more those processors start to spin up and become used and saturated, and that's going to become a time when you're using more inputs and outputs, when you're using higher CPU loaded effects and different things through the unit, it's going to start pushing that power limit, and it will fail. It actually will restart if it runs out of power. So that's something you really do want to be mindful of. If your unit doesn't look like it's using the stock power supply, I would strongly suggest you make sure that the power supply you're using has enough power to support you. Okay, I myself am using my unit on a pedal board with a Chox 7 DC7, I should say, power supply, and that's a great power supply. It does a number of really good things well, but it's very low profile, which is exactly what I wanted for the back of my unit. I didn't want to have a lot of wires and things that I had to be plugging in after the fact. It's a nice, clean effect where I literally just have one power plug that I plug into, and that gets everything else powered through the rest of my board. I am using a Temple audio board as well. I'll go through a full review of what that is, what it looks like, what I chose to be able to go with, and such as time goes on. But anyways, let's continue to dive into the unit and get you beyond talking about powering it on and actually getting into exploring it and getting you started. Right, now we're going to want to get connected with Wi-Fi. So This device definitely needs Wi-Fi. It doesn't need it to operate, but you're going to want it to be able to interface with some of the main features. Okay, so one of the big things that I called out was the fact that Neural DSP has been really good about software updates. Well, this is one of the ways you get them. Okay, you can use Wi-Fi to be able to pull those down directly without having any cords attached to your computer or doing anything else, which is fantastic. Now, I will give you a note. This is a tip and trick. You actually can get internet to this device by using the USB cable. So that's kind of an interesting one, because as soon as you plug in the USB to your computer, as long as your computer is connected to the internet, it will actually provide internet to the system, and you can just hit check for updates and update accordingly. You don't actually have to have it connected to Wi-Fi. So if for some reason or another you don't have Wi-Fi, as long as your computer has some kind of way to connect to the internet, you can totally do that. So it can share an internet connection across there. But most times people are using Wi-Fi. It's the 21st century. So you can also use your cell phone. That's one thing that I will call out. Really quick scenario. I'm not going to say this is a good one. I certainly would try to avoid this if you can. But if you're a traveling musician and you're on the road and a new update comes out and you're needing to be able to get that update, if you've been experiencing a problem or doing something like that, or heaven forbid, if you've got presets or something like that that you've lost or that you screwed up and you need to be able to pull back down from the Cortex cloud, having Wi-Fi and being able to reach out to the Cortex cloud to pull those types of things down is going to be critical. Wi-Fi is going to be required to do that. So you can absolutely do a hotspot tether off your cell phone or something similar, or hotel room Wi-Fi, whatever. I will warn you though, you want stable internet if you're going to be updating this thing and doing such. If you don't and you have an issue somewhere along the way, that can be a problem. Now, one thing I can tell you, I'm a bit of a tech nerd, is this does pull down the full software package, and it does a checksum and verification before it starts to install it. So really the biggest thing you should be concerned about is keeping stable power, because at the end of the day, the unit's going to check itself when it actually downloads that update package and verifies it to make sure it's good. So when you're actually performing the update, or when you're performing a restore from the cloud as well, from any backups, definitely make sure you don't unplug the unit. You will brick it. It will absolutely get to a point where it's just a big fancy $1,800 paperweight. So be careful. Okay, make sure to keep that power nice and stable. Anyways, let's get into logging into Wi-Fi. Okay, so you can click on this upper right hand corner. There is going to be ellipse, three dots, basically a hamburger menu, okay, if you will. And once you do that, you're going to need to scroll down. So when you generally click on that, you're going to just see create new, save as. You're just going to want to swipe your finger up to be able to get down to settings, and you're going to click that. Now, don't worry about these other menus for now. I'm going to block out a couple of things here too. Sorry, but I don't necessarily want this information out for everybody to see. But if we go to connections, this is where your Wi-Fi is going to show up. Okay, so any SIDs of Wi-Fi routers or anything like that are going to be advertised here. The unit will automatically scan and find them, and hopefully it will find the one you're looking for. So once you find the one you're looking for, you're just going to tap on it, and it's going to ask you to provide a password. You'll type in that password, and there's going to be a touchpad that you can use on the actual unit itself. That's just a standard keyboard like you'd have on a cell phone or something similar. You're just going to put in that password and hit OK. And as long as you see the green connected underneath the router of your choice that you've chosen, that should absolutely give you the internet you need to be able to interface and make this work. Okay, so now we're connected to Wi-Fi. Let's talk about what you need to be able to make use of all of the other features from the internet and being able to connect to Neural DSP. You're going to need a Cloud Connect account to be able to make use of backups and getting software updates, and also being able to participate in the Cortex cloud, which allows for users to be able to share presets and captures and all kinds of cool stuff around, as well as you being able to share those types of things out once you get a little bit more familiar with your unit. So to be able to get started with that, what you're going to need, and I'm going to put a link in the description below, you're going to need to be able to go to cloud.neuraldsp.com and be able to basically create an account. And within creating an account, it's free. All you need to do is provide an email, make your password, create your profile, and ultimately that's also going to allow you to link your Cortex. So once you create that account, it's basically going to ask you, okay, now you need to link your Cortex to be able to make this happen. So there's a couple things that are going to happen here. So the order of operations is you're going to be going to cloud.neuraldsp.com and create your profile, okay? And then you're going to go to your device and you're going to go to My Account under that same settings menu. So you were at your Wi-Fi settings here. You're going to go back to My Account, and there's going to be a button right here. As you can see, mine's already connected, and it's going to say Link Device. And when you click Link Device, it's going to ask you to log in with your Cloud Connect account information. And you're going to do that. Once you do that, this system is going to register the serial number and this Quad Cortex to your account. So it can only be registered to one account at any given time, okay? So you can't have multiple accounts and you can't have multiple people connecting the same Cortex to that account. It's gonna be one account per, okay? So once you do that, it's gonna register your device in there. And then from there on out, anytime that you're interfacing with the Cloud Cortex website to be able to pull down anything from, you know, your shared presets and captures and backups and whatnot, all of those things are going to be registered to your account. So you can see and interface with all of them from the website, as well as being able to do it through your Cloud Cortex, which is really cool, helpful. So once you have that set up, let's now look at being able to do backups. I think this is a really important thing, and I want to make sure that we call this out as quickly as we can. As soon as you get connected with your Wi-Fi and you create a new account, I want you to be able to go to backups here and do a new cloud backup. Let's just get a fresh backup out there, because as you start to mess with presets and different things like that, it might get pretty overwhelming on, oh, I messed something up. How do I get back from this, right? There isn't necessarily sometimes an easy back button, but you do have an easy button when it comes to being able to restore your unit. So this is definitely what I would ask you to do when you first get started here, so that way you have a clean backup of your system so you can go back to it at any time. Also, as you start to progress on making changes and doing things on the unit, I would suggest that you do this often. As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen anything that can automate making these backups. So these are kind of up to you to make. So at your discretion, you need to kind of get into working this into your workflow when you're messing with your Quad Cortex to make sure that you're doing it correctly. What I generally do as a case in point is, if I'm going to be making changes and I want to go explore one of the presets that I already have, and I'm going to go monkeying with it and doing some things, what I'll do is I'll actually take a cloud backup before I do that. That way I just have the easiest way to bail out. If I want to get back, if I've been playing for a couple hour session and I'm like, you know what, I just didn't really like where I ended up with that, I can totally put it back to where it was. Also, it's a good idea before you get to software updates and things like that to take a backup beforehand, because you never know what might happen. If you're for some reason running into a problem with a software update and you have to contact Neural DSP support, and, you know, heaven forbid, they actually have to like take your unit in to get worked on, or if it's completely failed and they have to RMA and get you a new one, there's no way that you can restore all the goodies that you had previously without having a cloud backup to do so. So it's good to do this often. And I definitely will tell you, it's the same as a computer, right? Make sure you save things before you go either turn the computer off or make an update. You're going to definitely want to make sure you save things ahead of time. So backups are important here. So definitely run them often. When you do, they're pretty fast. It doesn't take a really long time to do. In fact, I'm going to take this last backup that I have, and we're just going to run it again. Yeah, so I already have one here. You know what? In fact, here, I'll just do a new one. That's okay. We'll call this test for the sakes of being able to show you. And there. We'll let this run for just a moment. Boom. There you go. So that is a complete backup that can be restored from the Cortex Cloud using my account. So if I had a brand new unit, if I logged into Wi-Fi and I logged into my account on that unit, it linked that unit to it, I can absolutely just click download and it will pull down this latest backup and it will restore all the presets and settings that I had in the unit. So it's a super great way to be able to interface here. But like I said, I can't stress this one enough. Please make sure you take backups often. It's better to take them often and waste a few seconds to go through this than waste hours getting things back again. Now let's move on to taking a look for software updates. First, to be able to check if there are any, and then being able to actually execute them. I already know that my Quad Cortex is updated to the latest version, so I'm not going to be able to demonstrate to you what that update process looks like, but it's pretty straightforward, and it's very similar to, akin to the same as what you would get on a laptop or a cell phone. Like it basically works the same way. But let's walk through being able to check when you have one and how to go about this. Okay, so we're going to again go to this main menu here, and in the upper right corner, you're going to see those three dots, that hamburger menu. You're going to scroll all the way down to settings, and we're going to click. Now from here, you're going to go device options, and you'll see device updates is the first option right here. We're going to go ahead and tap that. And now right here, we can just say, okay, let's check for updates. We can see the version we're currently running. This QR code takes you directly to their support page where you can see news for the latest features. Quick side note before we hit check for updates here. Do read these when they come out. It's really pretty in-depth when they give the software update notes. And it's great to see. You really will find that there's a lot of things that you might be finding occasionally that are issues, and like I said, quality of life changes that you might not even necessarily know you were having a problem with until you read them in the liner notes and then find, oh, you know what? I know what was causing that now. Cool, that's fixed. I've had that happen a couple of times already, and it's really pretty nice. And Neural is a great software engineering company to actually take a lot of these release notes and give them to you in a way that is easily consumable and also very transparent. So I super appreciate that. Anyways, if you want to check for updates and know what's going on, you're just going to click this button. It will take a moment to be able to see if there's anything new for you. Obviously, like I said, I was expecting that this would happen. Mine's already up to date, so we're all good here. If it wasn't, it would say, hey, there's an update available. Do you want to run this now? And you can say download, and it will go through and it will download the update. Now, this is kind of the good part. It will download the update first, and it will leave it on the hard drive. Okay. And then you have the option to run it when you want to. So one good thing with that, especially if you have some space in your device, which you can see on disk space right below here, I have oodles of space on mine. So this is good. If you know you have space on your unit, and a lot of times I think these updates are about a gig, maybe a little less than that. What's good is you can actually pull down that update, download it, but not install it. If you say, for example, want to be able to do this, but don't have time right now and don't want to wait the 20-30 minutes to go through and tap it, you can download it, and then you can come back and install when you have the time to be able to make sure that that's all good. Generally, and this is just me being ultra paranoid, I generally like to be around when these types of things are updating. I don't like to click install and then just go walking off and leave the device for a couple of days sitting on its own before I go and do anything with it. I like to sit around and actually watch and make sure that it's good, because I need to know if there's some kind of action or something else that I have to do to try to restore if there's a problem or something like that. I want to know, and I want to know when it happens. I don't want to wait until way after the fact and not quite remember what I did or do anything like that. So definitely, if you're going to run an update, be around for it and be ready for it, because those installations do take about 20 minutes or so when it's actually going. So it takes some time. So it's not an immediate thing. It's not like taking the backup where it takes 5 seconds and it's done. It will take you a little bit of time to run one of these updates. So next, let's get started by looking at input and output. So as you can see on the screen, there is a full contextual menu that you can use that it allows you to explore input and output on your Quad Cortex. Let me show you how you get there. So from the main screen right here, so you're looking at the main grid. I'll introduce the term grid to you in a little bit as well. We're going to just take our finger and swipe from the top to the bottom of the screen. Sometimes it takes a couple times to be able to do it. I never get it the first time. Some people do every time. I don't know why, but anyways, let's go from left to right here and just step through what your I/O is on this device, and then we'll start getting a little bit further into in future parts of this video how to start to change things like leveling and doing things of the sort. I'm going to make an entire dedicated tips and tricks just to leveling, because I think it's kind of an important thing on this device. But for now, we're just going to go left to right, talk about some of the I/O, and then we'll move on to actually getting you started with being able to play something, and then we can get into here a little bit later on in advanced sections. So let's get started with USB. So there's two main things that I leverage USB for. First one, your Quad Cortex is a audio interface. So best part with that is you can interface with DAWs such as Logic Pro and Cubase and a few others, and be able to use this unit directly to be able to send and receive audio. So you no longer have to use a Focusrite or something of the sort to be able to make that happen. You can just send directly out in and out of these interfaces. When you do connect your Quad Cortex using USB, you'll have two dedicated inputs and two dedicated outputs that are specifically just crossing the USB interface, as well as full access to all the actual hardware input and output. You can capture all those lanes of audio through USB as well. So it's really powerful. It's cool. I can tell you one quick scenario that I use with mine. It's a little bit more advanced, but it works really well. I'll have Logic Pro up. I'll turn on a VST, and I'll be playing through a VST. And instead of just wanting to hear it on the studio monitors, say I actually want to hear it on a floor monitor or something else that's in the room, right? That way I can get a little bit more with that. What I'll do is I'll be playing my guitar through the VST, through an interface on the Quad Cortex here, and I'll output that signal back out to an output, say 3 or 4, to a studio monitor. So that way I can actually have something like that playing in the room. So it loops through, I can get the dry or wet signal or both through the USB using that VST to be able to capture, and then I can send that back out to the room so I can hear it. So again, that might be a lot of words you don't understand if you're not too familiar with being able to do some of those things, but just understand this is an audio interface. It can interface with your computer really easily, and it gives you a ton of flexibility when it comes to input and output capture, and you can do lots and lots of cool things with it to be able to do your home recording. So it's really good for that. The second main thing that you can leverage your USB for is Cortex Control. That is a new application that came out 5 or 6 months ago. And essentially it's an app that lets you be able to drag, drop, and interface with your Quad Cortex, just the same as you do when you're touching the screen and doing different things like that. You can totally use the app now, and as long as you're connected with USB to your computer, you can remote control your Quad Cortex and do all kinds of things. Most every feature is available in the app now too, so it's really powerful. If you're sitting at home and you're just trying to create new tones and kind of doing some of those things, I highly recommend that you potentially think about just connecting to USB and leveraging your computer if you have one, or if you have one that's strong enough to be able to interface like this, because it just makes you a lot easier being able to step in and out of menus and tweaking settings and doing things like that. The interface is really nice in the Quad Cortex, don't get me wrong, but being hunched over the device and kind of doing some of that sort of sucks. And being able to use a keyboard and mouse and kind of sit back in a nice, comfortable studio chair and actually be able to play with some of these things, it's a lot better. So I would suggest that you give it a try. I'm going to dedicate a video to showing you how to get started with that software, and then ultimately some of the things you can do with it when it comes to tweaking and tuning as well. So we'll get to that. So that's a whole lot about USB, but there's a whole lot to talk about. So next, EXP1, EXP2, this is for expression pedals. So the Quad Cortex supports 2 expression pedals. You can designate those in the software, and I'll go through how to do that later. I currently have one on my pedal board, and as you can see, EXP1 is assigned and running there. So it's fully calibrated, everything's functional. But essentially, as long as you have a supported pedal, which, spoiler alert, just about every pedal is supported, so long as you're using a stereo cable to go from the expression on the pedal to the expression port on the back of the Quad Cortex, it'll totally work. So expression pedals, you have 2. You can support those in a number of different ways, lots of different ways to be able to use them. This is also obviously how you can go about calibrating them in case you need to do that. I will tell you, I've had to calibrate mine a number of times, and it seems like after some updates, I also have to go back through and recalibrate them again. They'll be off and act kind of strangely. So I assume there's just, some gremlins and things when they perform some of those updates when it comes to changes that they might be making with the expression interface. But at any rate, do know that there might be times where you have to come into this input and output settings specifically to look at your expression pedals and making sure that they're calibrated. Okay. Next, MIDI in, MIDI out. Not going to go into extreme detail here. It's a MIDI interface in and out. You can catch clock signals off of that if you have audio interfaces that you're wanting to interconnect and make those things happen. If you have triggers that you're wanting to do, you can do all these through MIDI. Obviously, with the DAW and using the USB functionality, I do believe that can actually capture MIDI signals directly through USB too, which is cool. But if your interfaces are still using the standard MIDI cables and you're recording and capturing some of those things, you can do some of those activities here as well. So you can trigger events and different things to happen. So all that is possible here. Now, getting into output, okay? The first two, 1 and 2 on the channels are left and right on XLR. So as you see, there is 4 main outputs. There is 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the actual device when it comes to officially supported outputs. There's a slightly different impedance on using the XLRs versus the outputs 3 and 4, which are just general mono channels and line out. So do know that there is a little bit of a difference there for when you're using these. Now, I will tell you that there's not much of a difference. I mean, you could totally tune them however you like, but say, for example, if you're like sending to like front of house or doing something like that, you're probably going to want to use 1 and 2 with those XLRs, because more than likely that's the type of interface they're expecting, and that's the type of signal they're hoping to get off of that. But if you're sending to another unit, if you maybe send it in ears, or doing something else where you want to just be able to send a line out of what you're getting and make that happen, use 3 and 4. That's totally fine. They'll just use 1/4 inch jacks out of the backs of those, no problem. So also, as you can see here, you have the ability to control your output levels, both for left and right channel. You can do ground lifts. I would really avoid doing ground lifts unless you know what you're doing. If you don't know what these are, please leave them off. You'll blow up equipment if you don't, in some cases, so be careful with that. Output labels and output levels and limiter are going to be 2 things we're going to look at in a little bit more detail later here. I definitely want you to be able to see how these work, what your limits are. That way you can start to tune in your instrument and make sure that you're not clipping. Clipping at this rate, especially if you're clipping at your output on the Quad Cortex, is going to give you a really bad time when it comes to doing more with that signal later in your DAW, or if you're playing live and you're sending to front of house or doing something similar. You do not want to be clipping. That's going to really impact your playing and such. Also, you don't want to have your limiter set too low. It's to starting to cut your signal before it really has the chance to resonate. That's also another issue that you could have here too. By default, the defaults that are on here are probably going to work for most people. You'll be okay. If it's just a fresh install out of the box, you're probably okay with where it is right now. But you might find that you want to start to fine tune these things, especially if you have a guitar that's got a little bit hotter pickups or something similar in it. You might find that sometimes you're just pushing that limit a little bit too far and you start to clip, or you get close and you just don't like it. So we'll walk through this a little bit later on and get through it. But for now, I wouldn't worry too much about this. We'll come back to it. Headphones, obviously, you have the ability to have headphones on the unit. In-ears are generally what you can use to be able to do that. That's what I use sometimes when I'm playing around, and I'll use an in-ear in-ear mic that will plug into this input-output, and then I'll be able to capture the output on my headphones that I have. You can control the different levels that you get. Generally, this is also assignable, so you can send either multi-out and capture all the different interfaces outputs, or you can specify a specific one that you want to capture output for. That way you can zero in on just yours. Remember, the Quad Cortex is capable potentially of having multiple instruments being connected to it at the same time and playing at the same time. So it would get really pretty crazy if you were trying to have in-ears and hear everything else, right? You'll probably want to isolate something specific out of there. So this does give you the ability to do so, and obviously you can control leveling and volume to be able to make that happen too. So that's helpful. Here's output 3 and 4. I already mentioned this. It's basically the same as the XLRs in terms of the settings and whatnot. These are just the 1/4 inch jacks that you're going to have. You also have a full dedicated effects loop, send and receive 1 and 2. So you have two dedicated sets of your effects loops, which is great. You can totally use these for your existing pedals and different things that you have if you want to do so. You could also loop these back out to potentially a different modeler or even some rack mount units and be able to make use of those and then pull back the results there too. So it's very versatile. It works just the same as an amplifier. There's not really anything too crazy that happens there. You will see later in the grid view that you do have access not only to the internal effects loop in and out, but you can also assign, send and receive from the grid directly. So the best part with that is you actually have any pedals that you're working with virtually on this unit can add themselves to audio in that send and receive bank. So it's pretty cool. You can do some really unique things with that, which is neat. So you have a virtual, if you will, effects loop that will be able to bus or not, depending on your settings, to the actual hardware effects loops that are built in. And finally, we are looking at input 1 and input 2. So these two inputs here are going to be what you can leverage for your different instruments, right? So your line level or your guitars and whatnot. Same thing here. If you are using mics, obviously you're going to want to choose the mic setting with those types of cables. Also, ground lift, again, be careful with this. Don't use it if you don't have to, especially phantom 48 volt. Do not enable this unless you are leveraging a microphone that's going to need that. If you know specifically that it does, okay. If you don't know what this is, or you don't know if your microphone is using it, do not enable it. Don't blow up equipment because you don't know what you're doing with it. I don't mean to be facetious by saying that, but it's something that can damage equipment, and you'd be surprised how many people learn that the hard way. So if you're not needing it right now, don't use it. Also, if we step over really quick, you have a global EQ. This is set flat, obviously for me. I don't even have it turned on right now, but if you want to be able to have this be used, and you want to have a global EQ that where you know for a fact that your whole set, your scenes, your everything else that you're doing, you want to scoop mids, you want to bring in a little bit more bass, or you want specific hertz to be cut out of this for recording purposes or doing something similar, you can totally make those changes here. Obviously, you can also make those changes in the actual plugins and the amps and all of the different things that you're going to use in grid view when you're configuring your amp and all of the settings too. So this is just like it says, global EQ across the board. So if you always know you want to provide a specific balance in that EQ, and you don't want to set this in each and every pedal that you have, you can set those parameters here and make that happen. Okay, next let's talk about presets. So this is probably the place you're really wanting to get to, being able to actually play music with your device, right? And being able to do this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about presets, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a terminology tour and a couple of new terms that you'll want to know, as most of the documentation will reference them. So it's kind of important that you understand what those are. And so the first thing we're going to get started with is just looking at the device itself and finding out how to access presets. So let's take a look at that first. So on my screen, you see at the top left-hand corner, 1C US twin vibrato. That's basically what that means, okay? So this is a classic twin vibrato amp. What you can do to access the presets is to just click the name on that upper left-hand corner. And if you scroll all the way to the top here, then go to about here, right down. So in presets, don't worry about downloads, clouds, and my presets for now. We won't worry about those. We're just going to focus on factory presets. If you scroll up, in fact, you'll notice that there is 32 different scenes of these. And what's cool with them is you'll notice that on the right-hand side, each time you click one of these numbers, okay, you're going to see that number, that index number, in this case 32. You'll see 32 and then A, B, C, D all the way through H. Those correspond to the different preset values that are assigned to the actual pedals themselves on your device, those 8 main pedals here, okay? And obviously you can see the letters here, A through H. Those are your different presets for each one of the banks that you have here. So it's 32 banks with 8 different presets in each bank. Plenty and plenty of devices here. And these are continually being updated. So just so you understand this too, the Neural DSP folks are constantly working with licensing to be able to bring new devices to to emulation here and making this happen. So as they're able to do that, they'll perform captures on devices. Obviously, one of the big selling points on this device, if you're aware or not, is the ability to digitally capture the sound of a device, right? So in most cases, that's usually cabinets, guitar cabinets, and amplifiers, where you can basically plug in your lines from the device, tell it you want to do a capture, and it will digitally send many signals and all kinds of strange noises through that device in order to be able to make a digital copy of it, a digital clone, which generally ends up sounding pretty dang close to the original. Maybe you change a little bit of EQ for flavor and do some things like that, different IR possibly. But yeah, that's generally what you can do with the device, is be able to make all these captures. You could also share all those things, the Cortex Cloud and all these different things too, which is really cool. But for now, we're just going to focus on what's available in the presets. So these are all of the preset devices that have been pre-captured and modeled by the Neural DSP team and put out to this area. So you have lots and lots of choices here of what you can do. Now, one thing you're going to notice when you start looking through all of these different names is you're going to see things that look familiar, but they're not quite accurate to the real world. Classic case, for example, the Freeman 100, right? Well, that's actually a Friedman 100. But obviously, because of licensing and different things like that, they can't use the exact terms to call them that. And so this leads me to another quick thing I want to mention, which is deciphering presets. This can be a little bit challenging if you don't quite know what they are, or if they're a little too opaque or vague for you to actually understand what the correlation is to the real model that they're modeling off of. For that fact, I'm going to have a link in the description to a document that came from a Facebook group. I'm going to give a shout out to that Facebook group, the Neural DSP Quad Cortex official user group on Facebook. Great community. Please make sure to join that community and be able to do things. I'll have a link to them as well in the description. I'm certainly not trying to rip off any of the data that they have in that group, but if you join and you're there, they have files, and there's some folks that have done God's work in being able to make decipher documents of what the Quad Cortex version name is of a device versus what its real life counterpart is. And it's a very nice thing to be able to look at, to be able to understand some of these names so you can quickly identify what they are. So I took the latest version of that, and I have a link to it in my Google Drive just to make it really easy for you to do, just in case you don't do the Facebook thing. I know some people don't. So I will put that link there so you can get it. But I would strongly suggest, if you are on Facebook, join this group. It's a good group. I'm there. You'll get tons of people that are really helpful, lots of good conversations and troubleshooting as well, which really becomes handy when you're starting out, because obviously there's a learning curve here. So I digress. I will provide all that information. You can go at your leisure and take a look at that document and make sure what you're getting into here. What I'm going to just show you, though, is picking out a preset and just being able to get sound through it. So what I currently have in my setup is I have input going from my guitar. I have Nux wireless running currently, so I just turned on my interface. So essentially, I just have an input going to input 1 on the back of the Quad Cortex, and I have output coming out of output 1. So this is just mono. I'm not doing stereo right now, and that's going out to my audio interface on my actual computer. Now, I'm not using USB this time because I really wanted to keep this as pared down as possible. I didn't want it to be complicated in the description. So the signal chain is I'm going wirelessly with an input from my guitar to input 1 on the back of the Quad Cortex, and then output 1 out from the Quad Cortex to my audio interface of my computer, of which I am recording on this recording. And I will pick up my guitar briefly and just strum a couple of chords so you can just hear some noise coming out of this Quad Cortex. So this is where you can actually get started. So once you understand how to access some of these presets on your device, you can easily now jump in and navigate through some of them and start to be able to actually make some noise with a guitar going through your quad cortex. And that's at least to be able to get you started here. And then we'll start to step through making some changes through these interfaces, adding and removing things, and then also really playing with settings and getting to a point where you can start to understand how this works. Another big thing that I'm going to show you in a moment is how to control some of your inputs and outputs. That's going to be critical here, so that way you're able to get specific things to flow through I/O, the I/O that we talked about, like making sure that you're only capturing input 1 and making sure you're only sending out through output 1 or both or something like that. I'm going to show you how to do all those in just a moment too. Let's now take a moment to take a look at our preset grid and introduce to you a new term and a different type of control that you have over your devices. Okay, so if you look right here, there is right below the ellipsis where we were hitting the settings tab and doing all that, there is a toggle basically that if you tap, you can change from stomp to preset to scene. And then if you long press, you can choose a hybrid of these two different things. So we can go through what some of those things mean, but I want to introduce to you scene, stomp, and preset. This is going to be pretty vital for you to understand the grid and the way that these things operate. Specifically, the behaviors of being able to leverage them, when you should use one versus the other. I'm going to very quickly kind of gloss over this, but I promise you in later videos, I'm going to dedicate an entire session to talking about the difference between presets and scene. That's going to be vital for you, especially if you are trying to achieve presets and doing things where you have multiple scene and stages that you want to use throughout, say, a song, and not have a disruption to the output of your music. Using one versus the other has its benefits, but there's definitely going to be a time where when you press one of them, it's going to load in an entire series of pedals and different things that are in there. And when that's happening, no audio is going to come out of that channel until it's complete. And it's usually somewhere between 300 to 600 milliseconds, maybe a little bit more in there. So it's something that becomes kind of vital, and understanding how to use those is going to become important. So we'll touch upon the brief terminology now, and then I'll go into more detail in the future on how to make a decision on what to do when making that choice between scenes and presets. Okay, so let's talk about these different modes. And the first one is going to be stomp. Let's go to stomp. So stomp basically means that these 8 different pedals that you see here are going to be leveraging stomp pedals. So think about them like a guitar pedal, right? You can assign each one of the different devices that you have within your lanes here in the grid to a stomp pedal in stomp mode. So that's something that's pretty easy to do. So in this case, if we're looking, we have different modes that we can put these into. So in this case, let's say I want this reverb here to be assigned to stomp H. I'm going to, after I've clicked onto this, using this mode, this letter is going to designate the stomp pedal that it's going to leverage for being able to turn this on and off. Okay, and I'm just going to hit the check mark right here to say, yep, I want that. And like that, now I can toggle that on and off by simply pressing the stomp pedal. So if I was standing up, obviously my foot would be pressing that, and you would trigger it. So that's how you can use stomp mode. Okay, so it's just simply allowing for you to take each one of these presets in the grid, assign them to a stomp pedal to turn them on and off, or to toggle some other setting within there, and then being able to assign that to a specific pedal for usage. Okay. Now let's look at scene mode. So scene mode allows you to specify foot switches and activate controls in the settings for a number of devices in a rig. So what that means basically is in a scene, you can load up and change and manipulate settings for multiple things at the same time, simply by pressing one singular foot pedal switch. So it's a little different than just a stomp box where you just stomp it and it changes on and off toggle for like one specific device, right? A scene can manipulate many different things across all the different devices that are on that scene. It can add and remove devices even at that point. So when you're using scenes, they can be quite powerful. They're also quite taxing on the unit. And this is where it becomes a time where you need to know, again, when to use them and when not to. And that's going to get a little interesting when you go exploring and making some of this happen. But at any rate, you could almost put these akin, if you're a person that's a little bit more technical, like a computer background or something similar. Think of these like a macro. When you use a scene, it's a macro that's manipulating multiple objects at the same time in the background by basically having a replay of specific activities and functions and changes that you want to make within settings of multiple devices. Okay, so that's what you're going to take away, at least for now anyways, with scenes, and we'll talk about that later. Next, we're going to get into preset. So preset gives you instant access to 8 virtual rigs. So essentially, remember what I told you when you were looking at the presets that were in here, that you have this index, so in this case 1, right? And then you have 8 different presets that are assigned to the first bank, and the second bank all the way out to 32, right? So in this mode, what you're doing is simply just changing the preset, literally. So the stomp pedal becomes the change of the preset. So if you know that you want to use 2 of these presets and you simply just want to toggle between the 2, and you're not trying to manipulate the settings of pedals and whatnot, but you're literally just wanting to change to an entirely different preset configuration that would have a different amp, a different speaker, potentially, whatever your settings are there. That's what enables you to change the behavior of those stomp pedals. Again, this is just pedals A through H. These other pedals are designated for specific other things, like for example, like being able to change your tempo, being able to change the scene modes too. So if you press both of these together, I'm sorry, I just have these as common things that I stomp on a lot, so that's why I have these extra buttons here for protection, but I'll take them off really quick just so you can see. If I push both of these together, watch what happens. Watch right there. You see that? You can on the fly step on both of these at the same time and change the behavior. So if you have a song where you know you're going to use a preset change, but you also then need to say toggle back to be able to use stomp pedals to turn them on and off when you want to, this is how you can quickly change your grid to a different behavior assignment for these different pedals. So it's really pretty cool. It's a very powerful thing. Also, you can access your tuner here as well. So there's a lot of neat things you can do by long pressing this bottom button, the negative, I guess, on the 2 here, the one that says tempo and then hold tuner. So if you tap this, you can do the beat per minute tempo, and if you hold it, then you access the tuner. So really pretty versatile. It's cool. Now to be able to go back and forth between different preset banks and the likes, you can simply use these. So if you want to go to a different bank, down is this and up is this, and you'll notice 2, 3, 4. This is cycling through the banks that you have. Okay, so if you want to mess with being able to get into scenes and presets and whatnot, you can leverage this to change that behavior, and then these 2 are guaranteed, binded to be able to go back and forth between the different banks of those scenes and presets that you have. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce you to the grid. We call the screen that you're looking at right now with the different device blocks that you're using to build your virtual rig the grid. So it's basically 4 rows of 8 device blocks. So those rows are lanes, as I've been calling them, basically start from the left and go to the right. Okay, so this is essentially generally an input and in some format of an output in each one of these lanes across the grid. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that these have to be like physical inputs. You can actually have an output from a lane become an input on the next lane. And you could also have splitting and wiring that goes back and forth between the lanes and kind of is able to interact in each one of those grid patterns as well, which is really interesting. It's really versatile, and it also gets very complicated. So this is just going to be an introduction. Okay, so let's first start by just kind of taking a look at what you have available for inputs and outputs on a grid lane. Okay, so on this side we have all of our inputs that we've covered so far through I/O. Okay, so these are all of our different variations of this, and you have, obviously these are broken out as well into stereo and then returns and mono too. Let's take a look at output. Same thing. you have stereo outputs for the most part, and then you have a couple of your monos listed specifically. So that way, if you want to talk about individual pieces that are output that you can use, you can see the monos and then the stereo, as well as other, which gets into being able to pair, like I said, some of these outputs as basically inputs to another row, right? So internally, they're kind of almost like running a splitter from an output port back to an input of an amp or something similar of the sort. So that's your ins and outs on the grid. Now let's take a look at actually being able to interact with devices on the grid as well. So let's take a look here. So if I tap a plus in any area on this grid that basically doesn't have a device on it, I'm going to get a contextual menu that's going to allow for me to add a new device block. And this can be amp, capture, cab, overdrive, delay, reverb, compressor, pitch, modulation, morph, filter, EQ, IR loader, wah, FX loop, looper, utility. Lots and lots and lots of options here when it comes to devices and different things that you can do. I've already introduced you a couple of these smaller device blocks, including what we'll be talking about, which is taking a look at amps and some settings and doing that as well. But there's a lot of different variations of things you can do here. Cab, for example, if you pick cab, you're going to take one of the built-in cabs and be able to start to work that. As I mentioned, if you go down a little bit further, though, there's also IR loader. This is where it gets a little bit more advanced if you are familiar with being able to do impulse response with guitar cabinets and things of the sort. Basically, this is where you have the ability to drop in a device block that's going to then have a contextual menu within it that lets you pick and choose stereo and mono along with microphone configurations for different IR captures that you have. So if you have your favorite cabinet that you've done an IR capture with, you can totally port that and use it here. You can also find presets and things within the Cortex cloud that you can download for other people's IRs, as well as there's obviously a myriad of these for sale on the internet that you can just buy impulse responses and upload them to your Quad Cortex through Cortex Cloud and be able to leverage them here and be able to use them on your Quad Cortex, which is really neat. So let's just look at being able to go back and just add a device. So I'm going to add an amp just to be able to show you how to go through this. I'm not necessarily going to set this up to play it, but I just want to be able to give you an understanding a little bit about how this works, okay? So if we go guitar, now we have our whole list of all the different built-in presets that we have for guitar amplifiers that are here, okay? Now this is going to go through all of those presets as well as anything else that you've downloaded. So those types of things will also come in here if you have anything that's customized. Let's take a look. Could just take a top boost. That's fine. And now that we've done this, you see a new lane's been created here. That's just a splitter. So it's just basically going to be running our input from this side. So we'll take this back to 1. Our input here. Going out, and then it's going to input back to here. So our signal chain is just going to continue to flow. Your signal chain is almost always going to be flowing left to right, unless you see a splitter line come out and make a difference with that too. Which I'll make another dedicated video, as I've already mentioned, to get a little bit more detail about splitting and doing some of those things. I'm going to consider that to be something that's a little bit more advanced. Okay, but as you go through the grid, every item is able to be dragged and dropped to anywhere within the grid to be able to navigate. So it's very interactive when you're doing this. You could definitely put these into different coordinates. So obviously I already have an amplifier on that side, so that's not going to work. So we're actually going to go over here and throw this away, and you simply drag up to the right hand corner where there's a dumpster to be able to get rid of items. But if you want to say move this item down, you can totally make that happen. All right, and now you can see there's a splitter between the two, and you can get advanced with how this wiring is going to work. If you long press on there, you can have a lot of different options on how it's balanced, the type, whether it's mono or stereo, if it's split stereo signal, your balance levels, and different places that you actually want to connect to. And this is also where you can start to then choose where you want to maybe have a breakout splitter, say like from here down to a device and then back up to this first row. You can do that. Really, you're kind of heart's content in terms of being able to draw draw where you want things in your signal chain and make that happen. So this is just a basic example of being able to interact with the grid. But like I said, we'll get into a lot more detail in the future. There's definitely, with these block types too, this is the last thing I wanted to show you, is contextual menus. So with each item that you're interfacing with here, you actually have contextual menus that pop up here in the corners. You're going to get familiar with this as just an artifact of dealing with the interface in the Quad Cortex. These are very contextual based on the devices that you're looking at and working with, okay? So those items will change, not only obviously the menu, and I went to the cabinet now, so now we're looking at that view with the speaker microphones and the alignment for miking on cabs. But you can also now see that the context is a little bit different with this menu as it pops up, as it will be the upper areas here that you work with. So the interface will remain mostly the same, but there is context based on what it is that you're interfacing with as you're navigating the grid and kind of making some of those things happen. Okay, let's now take a look at something that most of you are going to want to do pretty much as soon as you start playing with presets, and that's changing settings, right? And one of the most common places you're probably going to want to change some settings is going to be your amp, right? Looking at your gain, your lows, mids, highs, being able to just do common things that you would with an amplifier to dial it into your flavor and to make that work. And in this case, that is going to be this block right here. So all of these different icons you're going to get familiar with over time, and you're going to start to see what they look like, what those icons mean, and what they designate in terms of devices and whatnot. This one in particular that kind of almost looks, I kind of laugh at it, it kind of almost looks like a credit card. That's an amplifier. So if you just tap on that, here's your initial configuration settings for what you can do for this specific amplifier. In this case, you can see it's a US twin vibrato. Those are some of the classic kind of, configurations from the preset. I haven't modified this or anything, so it's what came out of the box. And this is where you can kind of start to manipulate some of that sound. So that's what we're dealing with now. And if I say turn on bright, for example, hear that? So really easy, straightforward to be able to make some of these changes. And obviously, if you're looking here, there's two different things that you can do to be able to save these, right? So there's a check mark. The check mark is going to save what you've done, okay? So if you click that check mark, you're totally going to save what happened there, okay? Now next, if we click on this is where it can get kind of interesting, and very quickly people get lost here. So if you're not really familiar with being able to use IRs and specifically dealing with miking amplifiers, cabs, and doing things like that, then this is going to get kind of interesting for you. But these are the configurations of the two different microphones that are mic'd to the cabinet attached to this particular preset. So in this case, you have a 210, so two 10-inch cab of US TRMLX. I actually don't even remember what the heck that cab is, but I'll look it up and try to give you a quick note down at the bottom really quick. But at any rate, it's the cab that's assigned to this preset. And currently it's using a Dynamic 57 and a Ribbon 160 microphone that are mic'd with standard leveling, and the position is pretty much identical across the board. So there's different things that you can do to be able to kind of change these. Obviously, you can just start to interface, and everything is touchscreen here, so you could totally manipulate this in whatever way you see fit to make a change, including turning on and off microphones. If you just want to have a single mic, you can do that. If you want to change the microphones to something different, you could totally make that happen. Positioning, your distance, your level across those mics, being able to turn up the gain basically on that miking, you can do all of those things from here, as well as having an EQ available for the cabinet itself. So you can think about this almost like a paramedic EQ that's put right in between the amplifier and cab, right? So it's like in part of the mixer, being able to have the ability to change some of this, changing your output and being able to make some of those things happen. Again, these are more advanced settings. If you're not comfortable with this or you don't really know what they're doing, honestly, I really wouldn't worry about it too much right now. You're probably going to get more bang for your buck finding a preset that you like and just dialing in the flavor on the amplifier settings and maybe some of the EQing than you will here until you get a little bit more accustomed to how to handle some of the intricacies of messing around with cabinets. And I will tell you, there is a lot of power here, but with that power comes responsibility, and that's something you really got to know, because you can get out of your depth pretty quick if you don't know what you're looking at. So let's go ahead and jump out of here. So that's your basic settings for being able to interface with your amplifier. And now if you start to look at any other pedals or anything that are in this preset, you can totally start to just see how they work here. For example, there is a dedicated looper in this one. So I'm not going to go through all the settings here. We'll dedicate a video specifically to looking at tips and tricks for using the looper. I can tell you, for people that like to use these types of things, looping and such, especially if you're a player that play a lick, have it loop, and then keep adding to it and layer and for effect. If you're like a single instrument player that wants to be able to sound like you're doing more with a fuller kind of playthrough, this looper is great. It's really smart. If you're a smart player and you have other pedals that you're using physically, it's really good with MIDI too, so it can start to pull timing from some of those different items as well with the master clock across the entire Quad Cortex. So it's a quite powerful looper that I've seen a few $100 looping pedals struggle to even keep up with. So it's not an afterthought. It's a very powerful tool here. So it's cool. We'll get into that in the future because it's definitely a neat thing to play with. Now here's just standard effects, and for the most part, like I said, each one of these is going to be slightly different depending on the pedal that you're working with. In this case, looking at a digital delay, you have your standard things you would expect from a digital delay pedal. But yeah, you have all of these things right at your control and disposal, and you can change and manipulate, like I was mentioning, by just turning these different knobs here. You can totally assign some of these things and just start manipulating as you see fit, which is really pretty cool. As you can see, as I turn this, I'm changing the mod rate right now, which is pretty neat. I love the fact that that's something that they thought about to put into these pedals. It's definitely helpful, and it's making this an all-in-one unit that's useful. Especially something interesting when it comes to being able to limit your input, specifically with a noise gate. There are utility noise gates that are built into the unit, which are great. You can use them, and they're pretty versatile when it comes to being able to clip extra noise that you're picking up. And basically this comes a lot from noises that you're picking up from your pickups from just interference, right? Like lights and other electronics, and just the nature of the instrument in general being a little bit noisier, right? And when you're playing high gain and doing things like that, there's a lot of times where that noise becomes a real factor in whether or not your amplifier is going to start feeding back on you a lot, or you're just having a lot of extra noise when you're trying to be quiet, right? When you're like palm muting, for example, and then you get a bunch more noise from the guitar that you just can't stop because it's being picked up too loudly. You can use the utility gates, and if you add one, it's simply just being able to add a new device and then going to utility, and then simple gate or adaptive gate or utility gate, whichever one makes the best sense for your specific use case. We'll go through and actually look at all these in a later video. I don't really want to get too deep into that. My main point I want to show you is you can add one in the block here if you want to have a noise gate to be able to work with. But there is a built-in feature that's already here that already is assigning one to this input. So in this case, this is input 1 on my Quad Cortex. If I long press on input 1, there is already a noise reduction and a gain reduction that's already being assigned to this input. So if I want to heighten this amount, then it will actually act as a noise gate that is going to reduce the noises that are coming in from my guitar as needed, right? So you don't want too much, because obviously that'll clip your signal before it even has the chance to get through the amplifier, so that's not good, right? You want to have some ability to have dynamics and expression more than likely, but at the same time too, it is a nice feature that it's built in now, wherein before, and I think it was back in 1.4x or something like that of updates, this was something that you had to add by actually adding a block to the first chain of every interface that you had. And so one of the problems with that specifically was just the fact that you consistently had to deal with having to add that in every single preset, every single new thing that you wanted to do. Wherein in this case, it's already there. It's already configured. It already has a default. In fact, you can go through your globals and set your default to something different too if you want. So that way, if oh, I only play my primary guitar and it's always gonna have like 45% noise reduction, or else it's just whining the whole time when I'm playing, you can totally set that. And every time you create a new scene or path, it will retain that same setting across the board. So that's what you can do for input gates. Obviously too, and I've shown this a couple times indirectly, if you just tap that input, this is where you can decide what input you want for this given lane on the grid. So you could totally change these if you want to. So on the fly, you can make decisions on how you want to do that. And you can also pair inputs. So if you want 1 and 2 together to make a stereo input across that specific lane, this is how you do it, 1 and 2. So this means in this case that inputs 1 and 2 are going to go into left and right and essentially be applied to the left and right channel of audio signal all the way through this lane. Okay, so pretty cool. That's an interesting way to do it. And same with output. Output's a little interesting. So if you tap output, you can go a couple different directions. A lot of cases, the default is multiple outputs where it's going to send it through 1, 2, 3, and 4 and USB 3 and 4 out of the device. So this is where it gets kind of interesting, where you really have a lot of power to manipulate your outputs and how some of these things are going to work. In this case, it's just blasting your audio out basically just about every interface that it has to be able to get some kind of noise coming out of there. So more than likely, especially in recording scenarios, that's probably not good. You don't want it to do that. Just be, depending on your scenario and situation, but a lot of times you'll have very specific lanes and outputs that you want to have to be able to capture. So that way, you're not going to get doubling or, anything weird happening that might make your signal clip because you're sending too much audio through it or you're doubling it across multiple interfaces. So just a quick tidbit if you're working with that. But if you want to change your inputs and outputs for each one of these lanes in the presets, this is exactly how you can go about doing that. That's it. That's a wrap on the initial intro course for the Quad Cortex. I hope this has been super informative for you. I definitely would like to be able to get into some further details on specific items and do some deep dives, as well as just some smaller little tips and tricks videos that are 5 to 10 minutes to just kind of help you out along the way. It's a really versatile piece of equipment, like I mentioned, but it's also incredibly complex. So it takes time. You're going to have to be patient with it. Like any of these modelers, they're just getting more and more advanced. So it's got power. It also has a learning curve. Just be ready to deal with it. I'm here to help you any way I can. Please leave comments, questions in the area below, and reach out to me directly if you have any questions or anything like that I could try to help you with directly. I would really like to be able to try to do as best I can to get you going and have you making music in no time. So until next time, I'll see you soon. Later.